So guys, what if Naruto was new god and joined DxD Universe movie? Three omniscient beings stood looking down on the world ravaged by war. The Fourth Shinobi War had officially ended with Kagaya being defeated. If Kagaya had been successful, they would have interfered and stopped her. Should this have happened, they would have to start all over, as Kagaya would have destroyed all life save for herself. But that had not happened and the world had been saved. The first being in a dark blue robe spoke. What shall we do with him? Through his actions and power, the boy has every right to join us now. It would not be right for us to tear him away from his loved ones though, and should he become one of us, he would no doubt want to be involved in the world, which we are expressly forbidden to do. Only if the balance is threatened can we intervene. A rough, commanding voice spoke. He did believe he deserved to join their ranks, however in this world he would not thrive. I believe there is something we could do. We have him join our ranks, however we send him to a world that is just starting to take life. We can send him there as our representative for our pantheon, Amaterasu, goddess of the universe. Both Tsukuyomi and Shinigami looked at each other. This had the possibility of working. With the creation of a new world, they would need one of their own to represent them. With Naruto becoming a god, there would be no need for one of them to vacate their post and go to the other world. It could work, Tsukuyomi began. We could definitely send him there, and we won't lose anything from it. However, the main concern is what of the tailed beasts? All their chakra now flows through his chakra network. They are now part of his being and considered to be minor gods in their own right. Amaterasu looked deep in thought. The tailed beasts have caused nothing but trouble for the shinobi world. What if we have them serve Naruto? He already has their respect, and I am sure would be willing to go with him to the other world to support him. That seems agreeable to me. Bring him to us, for we need to tell him of our plans. He was not sure how he had gotten here. The last thing he remembered was facing Kagaya with Sasuke. He remembered the feeling of Hagoromo's power, which he could still feel coursing through his body, while he remembered sealing and defeating Kagaya once and for all. He could not remember this place. He looked up, and all he saw was an infinite expanse of white. There was nothing but an empty void of white in front of him. He knew he wasn't dead because he could feel his blood pumping in his body. Hello Naruto. The feminine angelic voice prompted Naruto to turn around. Behind him were three beings sat upon thrones staring at him. The voice he heard belonged to the woman that sat in the middle throne. She had raven black hair, wearing an intricate red and white kimono with a golden crown sighting on her head. Behind her was a large golden mirror that circled around her throne. The man to her right was a rather large man with long white hair. He too bore a crown on his head, only it was a circlet of silver and held an opal in the center of his forehead. He wore a light blue kimono, with a silver chain necklace. To the woman's left was a being that he knew well. This was the Shinigami. His very essence had been used to seal Kurama in his stomach, and as such you could say he had a close connection to the death god. Perhaps he was dead after all. Why else would he be in a white expanse of nothing save for the Shinigami and two others, who had to be deities as well? Dropping on his knees, he prostrated himself before them. I am sorry for my ignorance, Kami-samas. To his surprise, he heard the woman chuckling. You have no need to kneel before us, Naruto-kun. It is a pleasure to finally meet you. We have been watching your life for some time now. Please stand. Naruto stood back up and looked at the woman. Pardon my ignorance, Kami-sama, but I am not aware of who you are. Placing her hand on her cheek, the woman gave him a dazzling smile that shone like the sun. Forgive me, Naruto-kun. I am Amaterasu Omikami, gesturing to her right. This is my brother Tsukuyomi no Makoto, and of course, I believe you know Shinigami-san. He was surprised and honored to know he stood before three great kami. However, that surprise soon turned to confusion. Why would the kami want to see him of all people, and for what reason would they be watching him? Seeing the confusion on his face, Tsukuyomi decided to speak up. You are here, because we have decided to elevate you to our level. From this day, hence you are Uzumaki Naruto, god of healing, light, and nature. In that moment, a golden shroud of energy surrounded him and started to integrate itself into his being. It was like his chakra cloak he had when he connected with Kurama. Only this energy felt strange. At first it was a soothing cool wave of pleasure. Only for it to slowly start to burn his very being. Screaming in agony, he felt the energy burning away his body. Only to heal it back within seconds, for a whole 5 minutes. He was in agonizing pain, and when it was over he collapsed to the floor. Gasping for breath, he shakily got back on his feet. He could feel his body had changed. He felt stronger and lighter than ever before. Even his chakra reserves, which were already massive, were now completely endless. With this change, it felt he had more than even the Jubi. They told him he was the god of nature, light, and healing, and so he wondered, along with his boost to chakra, if he had received any gifts. Waving his hand in front of him across the ground, it suddenly exploded with light, and the once white wasteland had transformed into what could only be described as a paradise. As far as the eye could see, there was lush green grass, with trees of all kinds, bearing beautiful flowers and fruits. While the Shinigami looked at the new expanse with a small amount of disdain, he couldn't help but admire the young blonde god. He was the god of death, but even he knew life was needed. I do believe we made the right choice, don't you think, Amaterasu-sama? Smiling to herself, she nodded. I agree. Naruto seemed to have lost himself in the wondrous nature that he created, the full effects of his change not going unnoticed by him. Clearing her throat, well, Naruto-kun, how do you feel? A blade of grass slowly fell from the palm of his hand. I feel alive. He had never felt this at peace in his life. The closest he felt to this was when he was in Sage Mode on Mount Myoboku. With that thought in his mind, he wondered how Sage Mode would feel with this new power. However, before he tried to check, Amaterasu interrupted. Now then, Naruto, we have something else to tell you. But first, we think the rest of your party should be here with you. She then snapped her fingers, and after a flash of light, there stood the 9 Biju surrounding them. Unlike how he knew them though, they were all incredibly small, just like kids' stuffed animals. He found them to be exceptionally cute, and chuckled as soon as he saw Kurama. The Biju just looked surprised and clueless until they finally noticed they were tiny after Naruto's chuckling. Of course, Kurama was the first to react by baring his fangs at Naruto, who only found it even more adorable. Now that everyone is here, Amaterasu began, garnering the Biju's attention, causing them to go wide-eyed at finally noticing the 3 great kami. With your ascension to godhood comes responsibilities. We have decided so to not cause a change to the natural order of this world. We will send you and the Biju, who are in fact minor gods, to another world where you will lead our pantheon. Naruto looked like he wanted to interject, but she raised her hand to silence him. This world is just beginning to form. However, there are already other gods that populate the planet. In addition, there are 3 beings of immense power, those being Ophis the Ouroboros dragon, Great Red the Apocalypse dragon, and Trihexa the apocalyptic beast. Naruto turned to face the Biju and smiled softly at them. Ready for another adventure, guys? The Biju smirked at each other and then all together tackled the young god. Unknown to most, the underworld was not a desolate barren wasteland. Instead of constant fire and brimstone, the underworld was a lush land filled with plant life. Lakes and rivers. When Lucifer was cast down from heaven, he had expected the underworld to be the complete contrast of heaven. However, this was not the case, while indeed it did not quite have the peaceful and serene feeling of heaven. It was still a far cry from suffocating. Once Lucifer had recovered, he had decided to explore this unfamiliar territory that would become his home for the rest of his days. In the underworld, there were massive areas of forest, plains, and mountains. Feeling a deep power in the forest, he went to investigate. The underworld was supposed to be devoid of life, considering he was the first to be banished here. Instead of walking the great expanse of land, he took to the sky with his new wings and flew, scouring the land for the great power he felt. After flying for a few minutes, he came across a humongous valley, and laying in the valley was a small wooden cottage with a stone chimney spewing out smoke. The power he had sensed seemed to be emanating from the cottage, and so he began his descent towards it. When he reached the ground, a sense of peace washed over him, stripping him of his anger towards his father and leaving him in a blissful state. With each step, he could feel the power growing stronger and stronger. Before he could get too close to the cottage, the door swung open, and out walked a man with bright blonde hair. Lucifer stopped dead in his tracks and watched as the man walked towards him. This being was the source of power he sensed, and as he walked it seemed like nature itself swayed to his command. The man stopped a few feet away from him and spoke. What is your name? Without moving, Lucifer replied, I am Lucifer, the first son of God, and I have been banished here by my father. God does not command my home, however, I will allow you to stay and live here should you and your kind obey me in all things. Lucifer bit into his cheek. It seemed he would once again have to be chained to another powerful being. In truth, he didn't have a problem with it since he could tell this man was at least as strong as his own father, but he was confused about what this man meant by his kind. Might I inquire as to who you are before I make my decision? Lucifer asked. My name is Naruto, Shinto god of healing, light, and nature. Naruto answered as the sun that gave light to the underworld shone with all its might, and a wooden throne made from tree roots sprouted from the ground, upon which Naruto sat. Lucifer's eyes widened as he took a step back. He of course knew other gods had existed, although he had no idea he would ever meet one. While still in heaven he had often heard his father complaining about the other deities, though he had never heard of this one. So, what say you, Lucifer, first son of God and the first devil? Bowing his head, I humbly accept your kindness at welcoming me into your home. Naruto smiled at him, and beckoned him to walk with him. Since you have arrived, more of your kind have entered my home and are searching for you. Make sure that they know this is not their land. They may live in it, but only at my discretion. Now then, go and find the rest of your family, but always remember to come and visit from time to time. I should like to think of us as friends one day. Alarmed and elated at the news, Lucifer went off to search for his kind. All in all, 75 of his brethren had become devils like him. The strongest 3 joined him in ruling over the other devils, who became the heads of the 72 pillars. While they did not rule over the underworld like the 4 strongest, they were the high-class families, the nobles. Of course, he had the other 3 come with him the next time he visited Naruto, considering they would be ruling the underworld with him. Since they had all pledged loyalty to him, Naruto was fully accepting of them so long as they upheld their side of the deal. However, shortly after meeting with the devils, a problem presented itself. Fallen angels had been created, and they too hoped to take up residence in the underworld. And so, Lucifer led his younger brother Azazel, the leader of the fallen, into the forest to meet with Naruto and find a solution. It had then been decided that the fallen would take up residence of everything to the northeast of the forest, while the devils would have control of everything to the southwest. Should anyone break this agreement, their lives would be forfeit. With this, Naruto had split the underworld into 4 quadrants to hopefully keep the peace between the 2 races. The other 2 uninhabited quadrants would serve as buffer zones to make sure there would be no fighting. Unfortunately, over time tensions grew between the 3 factions, with small skirmishes between the fallen and devils becoming frequent in the underworld. While they both fought the angels on Earth, the first few skirmishes between the devils and fallen in the underworld had gone unnoticed, but after the next few, he became aware of what was happening in his home. The next skirmish to happen ended as quickly as it began. When both sides met to fight with each other, roots and vines sprung from the ground and ensnared every fallen angel and devil alike. Some managed to escape their initial bonds, until the roots came back with a vengeance encased in holy energy to prevent further escape. At first many thought that the angels had breached the underworld and entered the fight to slaughter them, until Naruto appeared in a flash of light before them. Without looking at anyone or even moving, Naruto ordered, "Leave. Should you fight among yourselves again in my home, I will not be so lenient." As soon as he appeared, he vanished along with all the roots and vines constricting them. Using their better judgment, everyone quickly left the field to return to their homes. They all knew of Naruto from over the years. Most were able to meet the happy god that was so full of life, and seemed to take away all your worries. However, they also knew that he held the power to squash every single one of them, and from that day agreed they would never go against his command. The last battle, the armies of heaven, underworld, and Grigori fought in a terrible battle on Earth. It was a battle that changed the land, for everything surrounding the battle was reduced to ash due to the holy and demonic energies clashing for 3 days straight. In the center of the battle stood 10 figures, the heads of each faction, the 5 leaders of the Grigori, the 4 great Satans, and the biblical God of Christianity. The battle between these superior beings was so great that only the leaders could survive the oppressing aura. After constantly fighting, the fallen angels were unable to continue and had made a hasty retreat due to already losing 2 of their own. Now it was just a fight between God and the Satans. The biblical God, who was 3 times larger than any man or devil, wielded a mighty warhammer made of light. With this weapon, he killed 3 of the Satans after hours of fighting. Lucifer was the last to defy him, and he knew this would be the toughest fight. Lucifer fought him with orbs of fire with heat that rivaled the sun, as well as a longsword dark as night. The blade pulsed with foul demonic energy and had given him caution many times with its lethal touch. With each cut from the blade, he could feel his strength leaving him. Every attack he landed on Lucifer was quickly paid back, until both were out of breath from the fight. With the last of his strength, he dismissed his warhammer and condensed the remainder of his energy into a light spear. In a last-ditch effort, they charged each other and dealt fatal blows. God had stabbed Lucifer in the lungs, and with the amount of holy energy in the spear, it would spread through his body and kill him in moments. Lucifer, while taking a fatal blow, had struck God in the heart. As soon as he removed the sword, God would die. All fighting had ceased. Once they sensed the fading energy of the Satan leaders, and God's powerful aura diminishing, silence filled the air, as every being focused on the center where the leaders were. Michael and Azazel, who had been recovering from fighting, pushed through the crowds of people to where God and Lucifer were. Michael dropped to his knees in disbelief and agony. Azazel put a hand on Michael's shoulder as a comforting gesture. He had gone to war with God and Lucifer, and was happy to see them both dead, but the man was still his father, and Lucifer still his brother. Steeling himself and preventing himself from crying, he walked towards their dead bodies. Slowly angels, devils, and fallen began to approach the scene and saw the situation. As the murmurs and whispers began, Azazel left the bodies of his family and addressed the group. He called for a ceasefire, to which everyone agreed since they all wanted to mourn their leaders and fallen comrades. The Great War had finally come to an end in a horrible way. While the Great War had finally ended after years of battle, the devils would not have peace just yet, as soon as the factions retreated. The Grigori to their side of the underworld, and the angels back to heaven. The devils erupted into a power struggle. They were the one faction that had lost all of their leaders, and as such were vying for power amongst each other. The devil population had been split in two due to the end of the war. Half of them wanted to continue the war to prove their superiority, while the other half wanted to keep the peace since they had suffered too many losses already. Thus, devildom split into two factions, the old Satan faction who wanted war, and the anti-Satan faction. The day was old, the sun had just begun to set and an unsettling quiet descended upon him. He knew the underworld would never be the same after the Great War, but he had hope for these mortals. The forest in which he lived was connected to a larger mystical forest which the devils had used to obtain familiars. His land, however, was protected and became a sort of haven for the mystical beings should they wish. As such, he could see sprite dragons, fairies, and imps through the trees and flying in the air. A few of the fairies would come up to him and relax with him. Of course, peace never lasted long, and his and the animals' peace ended when a fallen angel floated down from the sky. The mystical beings were always wary of everyone besides Naruto and fled back into the forest. Taking a sip of tea, Naruto opened his eyes and asked, "What do you want, Azazel?" The now named Azazel smiled brightly at him. "I was just hoping I could spend time with you, my friend. Since we are at peace temporarily, I no longer need to be overseeing everything in my faction. Shemazai will be able to handle everything accordingly." Instead of answering, Naruto merely waved his hand to the side, and a wooden chair sprouted from the ground. Seeing how he wasn't turned away, he gladly took the seat and smiled when Naruto poured him a cup of tea as well. The two then fell silent and merely enjoyed the other's company. Soon enough the animals slowly started to return, although they were still wary of Azazel. Setting his cup on the mahogany table, he folded his hands and stared at Azazel. For Azazel it was quite unsettling, considering Naruto was infinitely more powerful than him. He felt like he was a child about to be admonished by his father. Finally, Naruto spoke. "What do you plan to do now that the war is over?" Without even hesitating a second, "Oppai. Beautiful, beautiful Oppai. The reason I fell from grace. I will scour the land searching and sampling the best Oppai." Before he could continue with his perverted obsession, a root rose and whacked him over the head. Azazel grimaced and chuckled slightly. Knowing something like that would happen, Shemazai would always start to beat him down whenever he went on one of his perverted rampages. He then stared at Naruto with sharp eyes befitting a leader. "I want to keep the peace at all costs. My faction has always been the smallest of the three and the war has caused us too many losses. Peace would give us time to heal, and hopefully find true peace instead of just a ceasefire. It would also give me time to research those sacred gears my father made." Besides the perverted nature Azazel had, he truly liked the man. He reminded him of Jiraiya. Both were super perverts and truly wanted to find peace. "I am glad you feel that way, Azazel, and I hope you never falter in your search for peace." Azazel just smiled and nodded at him. Before they could continue their conversation, two more figures were flying towards them. This time they were devils since they had black bat wings. The first devil landed. He was rather tall and had red hair. No doubt this was a member of the Gremori family. The other was a rather voluptuous woman who showed no emotion on her face. The woman was the first to land, and walked up to them. She showed no emotion on her face while she came to them. However, when she saw Azazel, a look of hatred flashed across her face before it was once again emotionless. She turned to Naruto and spoke. "Naruto-sama. I am Kateria Leviathan, and I require your help to quell a terrorist organization in Devil Society. They wish to reform the government and put an end to the Great War. As devils, we cannot accept the deaths of the Satans and must continue the war to avenge them." Azazel glanced over to Naruto, wondering what he was going to do considering he had never participated in the Great War even though every faction had requested his help. Naruto did not respond to her and turned his head towards the other devil who had landed. The Gremori walked up to them and knelt on the ground bowing his head. "Naruto-sama. I am Searzek's Gremori and I humbly ask for your help." Without lifting his head, he continued. "I am part of a faction of devils who wish to end the Great War once and for all. We do not wish for more bloodshed. We want to better the devil race and have peace." Naruto looked at the two representatives and beckoned them closer. Once the two came closer, wooden chairs appeared and he gestured them to sit. Searzek had no problem taking the seat. However, Kateria seemed to have trouble sitting at a table with her enemy and a fallen angel. "Now, is there any way your two factions can avoid civil war?" I would have hoped you were sick of all of the bloodshed, but it seems your bloodlust has yet to be sated. He then poured himself another glass of tea and took a sip while he watched the two devils. Azazel had wisely been keeping his mouth shut, knowing that he had no say in this matter. In all accounts, a civil war between devils would be good for his faction since the devils would be weakened. However, should Cataraeus' faction be successful, the Great War would start all over again, and that would be bad for every faction. I will not participate in your war. I have seen too much of it myself and do not wish violence upon anyone. Kataria looked angered by his statement. She knew from her ancestor that Naruto was a friend to devil kind since he allowed Lucifer and the rest to live here, and over the years had become good friends with Lucifer himself. She kept her anger to herself however, since she was surrounded by enemies at the moment and wisely kept her mouth shut. Sirzex however was heartened by his answer. Even though Naruto would not be helping him, at least he wasn't helping Kataria and her side. If he had decided to help her, his rebellion would be crushed. Just because I will not fight either of you in this war does not mean I will not help. Send to me your wounded from both sides, and I will heal them to the best of my ability. Both the devils perked up at that, while Kataria was hoping he might share a portion of his power with them. This could have been considered better. With Naruto healing her soldiers they would be able to outlast the rebels. However, any you send to me to be healed will not be allowed to leave until the war is official over, regardless of which side wins. With this proposal, both sides would have to choose whether to save the lives of their friends quickly and force them to quit fighting, or to have their own healers patch them up slower so they could still fight. Naruto hoped that if they did this, the war would be over faster, and many lives would be saved. Kataria seemed to be upset with this stipulation, but nonetheless thanked him for his willingness to help. Likewise, Sirzex wasn't too pleased but understood. It would seem he would have to choose carefully on who he would send to Naruto. Unable to stay in the presence of her enemies, Kataria bade Naruto farewell and flew off. Instead of following her action, Sirzex stayed seated and watched as Naruto and Azazel once again fell into comfortable conversation. Excuse me, Sirzex said, clearing his throat. Naruto and Azazel both gave Sirzex their full attention. I understand Lord Naruto being on good terms with our factions, but how is it you are so comfortable around each other? Without answering, Azazel looked over to Naruto for guidance. All he received however was a wave of his hand, which he took as permission to explain everything to the young devil. I along with Lucifer practically grew up with Naruto. You could say he is essentially my godfather. At that statement, Naruto raised an eyebrow at him, but didn't rebuke. Of course, I spent more time here than my brother, but he never really could stand me for too long. Naruto here made the time more bearable I am sure, but he still had his disdain for everything our father had created. Sirzex seemed to contemplate his answer to himself. He hoped to one day be on good terms with Naruto as well, considering he had control of the underworld. Looking at Naruto he asked, why didn't you participate in the Great War? At first, I would have assumed you would help God considering you yourself are a fellow god, but you never participated. Azazel himself had asked Naruto many times, but he never got an answer from the god. He was curious to see if he would answer this time. I have seen enough war to know its horrors. Their full attention was focused on him now. As he ran his fingers through his hair, I saw too many of my precious friends die in war, so that if I have the chance to avoid war one will. In war there are no winners, only survivors, and being a survivor will haunt you for many nights as you see your comrades dying over and over. However, if I am dragged into a war one will fight for what I believe in. What would make you fight? Naruto glared at the young devil. It would seem he was still trying to coax him into fighting in this pointless civil war. Should I myself be attacked, or my rules are broken, I will swiftly end this petty conflict. However, if you try to trick me I can guarantee you won't succeed and my retaliation shall be swift. Sirzex immediately tried to placate him by waving his hands in front of him. I would never try and deceive you, I was merely curious. The Devil Civil War had ended years ago, and due to the war and many atrocities that happened during it, he could no longer find himself able to live in his home permanently. He had tried to help save as many lives as possible, and guide the people towards a brighter future, but they had not listened. The new Satan faction slaughtered the families who sided with the old Satan faction for fear that they would one day rise. And a new civil war would come about, once the war ended. The devil population had been severely reduced, and with birth rates so low, they had come up with a way to bolster their forces due to the new Beelzebub. Ajuka Astaroth, he created a form of slavery which forcefully transformed beings into devils which would then bind them to their master who turned them. He based this system off the human game of chess, in which the king would have all control. They called them the evil pieces. As soon as they were distributed to the high-class devils, nobody was safe. Devils went out and scoured the land searching for powerful recruits, with most not giving any choice of whether to become a devil or not. Some would use their pieces to make slaves who would work for them on pain of death. Any who defied their masters and ran away without permission were labeled as strays and were hunted down and killed like animals. Eventually, a reincarnated devil killed her master after seemingly losing herself while channeling senjutsu. She was a nekosho, who were a species of cat yokai who had the innate ability to use senjutsu. The devils, fearing that the nekosho could pose a threat to them, had ordered the eradication of the entire species that lived in the underworld, and after the slaughter there were only two that remained: Kuroka, the black cat who fled after killing her master, and her younger sister Sharon, who was put into the peerage of Rias Gremory. While the slaughter of the nekosho had been ordered, Matabi, the two tails, had been living with the nekosho who she considered to be kin. As soon as the devils began to slaughter the nekosho, Matabi engaged the devils, desperately trying to save her kin. Unfortunately, the devils had numbers on their side and were able to hold her back until Naruto had learned of the massacre. He had arrived in time to see some devils trying to force their evil pieces inside Matabi, and immediately flew into a rage. He had promised, once he had freed the Biju in the elemental nations, that they would never be sealed or become slaves again no matter what. Before any of the devils could react, Naruto had unleashed his holy energy and wiped the attacking devils out of existence. Due to the influx of holy energy, the Satans arrived at the scene and saw Naruto standing over the bodies of devils next to a giant flaming blue cat. Sirzex had no idea the power that Naruto held, especially since none had seen him truly fight, and he was always more of a peacekeeper. Without a word to the Satans he had come to know, he and Matabi turned away and vanished, not to be seen in the underworld again. Present story start. What have you learned, Kaneko? A beautiful redhead asked. Pervert smells like a dragon, bucko. A bland, monotonous answer came from the small, 15-year-old girl. She was small for her age and wore the standard freshman girl's uniform for Kuo Academy. The redhead smiled to herself, clearly happy from the answer she received. If he smelled like a dragon, that meant he had a strong sacred gear, which would be incredibly useful for her. Excellent. It seems like our scouting has been worth it. What of the fallen? Is she still pretending to date him? Yes, Kaneko replied. They have been going out for a couple of days. Good. That means she will most likely do the deed at some point today. No doubt getting tired of her charade, once the fallen killed Issei, she would arrive as he was on death's door and revive him. From that point on he would be loyal to only her since she gave him another chance at life, and she would gain a powerful new piece. Not only would reviving him make him loyal, but the fact that he was a massive pervert. He was an incredibly unpopular boy at school due to his exorbitant love of boobs and could easily be manipulated by flesh, although she didn't enjoy manipulating people, especially those she wanted to join her family. Time was not on her side and she needed as much strength as possible for her future fight. It had been 10 years since he had seen any conflict. And during that time he lived as a humble human who ran a small Shinto shrine. People would visit the shrine and worship the Shinto gods. And he even had a young Miko who went to the nearby school. It was a peaceful life, one that he knew would eventually come to an end. While he lived peacefully, the Biju were looking out for the yokai, mainly due to the close connection they believed they had with each other. Kurama, however, was the only one who lived in Japan with him. While he lived in Kuo at his shrine, Kurama had taken up refuge in Kyoto where the ruling yokai lived, who was ironically a Kyuubi yokai. Kurama would occasionally come and visit him, however he spent most of his time acting as the protector of Kyoto and a sort of grandfather for all the yokai living there. He had known that the devils held a presence in the town, but since they did not seem to be disturbing anyone he had ignored them for the most part. However, over the past few days he had noticed that a few fallen had entered the town, and that was a case to worry. So far, he had only seen one, and she was running around with a human boy who had a dormant sacred gear. The fallen hadn't done anything malicious, but just to be careful he was keeping an eye on her. Before he could leave the shrine to go watch the fallen, he had to let his Miko go home for the day. Akeno-chan, he called out. Akeno Hamejima, the girl who became his shrine's Miko about 4 years ago, appeared around the corner. She was wearing the traditional garb, with a yellow bow holding her long black hair in a ponytail. Yes, Naruto-sama? She asked. I am leaving for the day, he said. You may stay as long as you wish, but be sure you get home safely and don't neglect your homework. With that said, he walked away intent on finding where that fallen angel was lurking. Akeno smiled as she watched him leave. He was probably only 5 years older than she was, and he was such a kind person. It seemed like he was truly blessed by the Shinto gods because she had seen him heal children and elderly who were brought to the shrine. He never complained about his duty and always had a loving smile on his face. Oh, how she would love to corrupt him. When they were alone at the shrine she would constantly tease and flirt with him. Hoping to rile him up or have him make a move on her, he would often flirt back, but never acted on anything even when she gave him ample opportunity. One day, she would capture his heart, and on that day she would finally be able to reveal herself to him so he wouldn't be afraid of her or discard her. His only goal was to watch the fallen, and not intercede, but when the fallen angel had thrown a spear of light through the boy's gut, he knew he couldn't stand by and watch as the boy died. He slowly walked towards the downed boy and fallen angel floating in the sky. As he got closer, the fallen finally noticed him and focused her attention on him, forming another spear of light. She noticed his priestly garments and questioned, "What are you doing here, priest?" He kept walking towards them until he was standing above the dying child. "I cannot let you kill this boy. Leave now, Rainier." Rainier had a confused look on her face. How did this human know what her true name was? The only possible way was if he had heard her as she was talking to Issei before she stabbed him. If that was the case, why hadn't he interfered beforehand? She then snarled, "You can't stop me, human, and for trying to interfere your life is now forfeit." She threw her spear at the man intent on killing him and watching as they both slowly died from blood loss and pain. She was in for another surprise when the spear never pierced him. Instead, the man had snatched it out of the air and was now pointing her own weapon at her with a blank look on his face. No human should be able to wield a light spear, especially one that didn't hold a sacred gear. For the first time in her life she felt afraid of a human. "I will not tell you a third time, Rainier. Leave." The look in his eyes showed that he would not show her any mercy, and that if she stayed she would die, just like that foolish boy. Without a word she turned and flew off into the night. Once he was positive Rainier had left, he let the light spear dissipate and turned to heal the boy. As he turned, he noticed a small paper in the boy pocket that was glowing red. His eyes narrowed as he recognized what it was, and just as he expected, a large red seal lit up the ground and from it came a beautiful red-haired girl wearing the Kuo Academy uniform. Rias had expected to appear in front of a dying Issei who would be eternally grateful for saving his life. Instead she found herself with a dying Issei and a Shinto priest. "Hello, Devil-san. As you can see, you are not needed here. Go and prey upon someone else," Naruto said as he put his hands over Issei's stomach and healed him back to perfect health. The process took no more than 30 seconds, and in that time, Rias just stood there in shock. "I am sorry, Priest-san, but that boy is to be part of my peerage," Rias said in defiance. There was no way she was going to let this man ruin all of her planning. If it came to it, she might have to call upon the rest of her peerage to run him off. He saw Issei's chest once again begin to rise and fall and smiled. He then turned back towards Rias and glared at her. He laughed a bit to himself when she unconsciously took a step back from him. It was good to know he could still intimidate power with looks alone. "I do not mind if he becomes part of your peerage, girl." Rias frowned at the demeaning tone he used. "However, you will allow the boy a choice on whether he wants to become like you on his own free will. I refuse to let you steal that from him." Rias thought for a moment. She could always just tell Issei the perks of being a devil and surely, he would accept. If that didn't work, she could show him some of her skin and remind him of how devils normally had multiple partners due to the low birth rates. "No, I do not have time to convince him to join me. He will accept and become one of my family tonight." Naruto raised an eyebrow at the girl. She was different than many of the devils he had killed in the past who didn't care for their slaves. Looking over her again, she began to look familiar, like he was seeing a younger, more feminine version of someone he knew. It was then when he was focused on her long red hair that he knew who she was related to, and that alone would keep him calm. "If you do not have the time for him to wake up, then I will wake him up and have you explain everything that could happen to him now." When he was done, he put his hands over Issei's head, and once they were done glowing green, Issei opened his eyes. With a loud gasp for air, Issei's eyes opened and sat upright looking around. The last thing he remembered was talking with Yuma, who he thought had asked him to die for her. He looked around and to his surprise he saw the breathtaking Rias Gremory looking over him, and some priest kneeling next to him. "What's going on? Where's Yuma-chan?" Rias stared at Naruto, begging him with her eyes to at least explain this part for him, and to her relief he nodded at her. "The girl you know as Yuma, was it?" He got a nod in response. "Her real name is Rainier and she is a being known as a fallen angel, and she tried to kill you. She would have succeeded had I not intervened on your behalf." Before Issei could even ask what he was talking about, he continued, "There is so much more to this world than you know. Mainly because you are a human. For starters, I'll explain that besides humans there are 3 other important beings. Angels, fallen angels, and devils. From here on out I'll let your classmate explain things." Naruto then gestured towards Rias. Issei shook his head in disbelief. "You're crazy, old man." Before he could say anything else he heard a cough and looked at Rias. Protruding from her back were 2 black leathery wings. "Everything he told you is true, Issei, and as to how I know, I myself am a devil." She watched as Issei's face changed from shock to lust, and back to shock. it clearly wouldn't be difficult for her to persuade him, leaning down towards him, allowing him to have a good look at her cleavage. I would like for you to join my peerage and become a devil like me. Issei was clearly enamored with the young girl's breasts, and for sure would have accepted right there and then had Naruto not smacked him upside the head. Don't accept anything before you know all the facts, you moron. Issei glared at him at first but then seemed to agree with him. So then what would becoming a devil mean for me? Rias pouted a little, which made her look even sexier to Issei. And then sighed, accepting the fact that she'd have to explain everything to him. If you become a devil, your lifespan will increase drastically as you will likely live for a few thousand years. And as such you will retain your youth for a long time. As a devil you will unlock a pool of devil magic allowing you to study and learn how to use magic such as teleportation. While he seemed slightly interested now, it was time to throw in the killer. If you get powerful enough you will be able to form your own peerage and have multiple wives. You would be able to build yourself a harem. At the word harem, Issei's eyes began to sparkle with desire. This was it. He would be able to make his dream come true and become the harem king. He was so excited that he accepted immediately. Waving off Naruto's attempts to reason with him, he had heard all he needed to know and wouldn't hear anything else. Naruto sighed, realizing that there would be no way to change the young hormonal boy's mind. It seemed he was an incorrigible pervert just like Jiraiya. However, unlike Issei, he was sure Jiraiya would have thought about it for longer. He had to give it to the girl. She knew how to manipulate him, and boy did she play him like a fiddle. Rias beamed when Issei accepted her proposal and quickly summoned her spare pieces. At first she pulled out 4 of her pawns and tried to get them to bind with Issei. However, it didn't work. She smiled that 4 pieces weren't enough to reincarnate him, as that meant he had a very powerful sacred gear. This time she tried all her pawns and set them towards his chest. In the name of the House of Gremory, I command thee, rise and live life anew as a devil. Issei Hyodo. She poured her magic into the pieces and a red glow enveloped the clearing. The pieces sunk into Issei's chest and he immediately passed out to allow his body and mind to adjust to becoming a devil. Now all she had to do was take him home and introduce him to the rest of her peerage at some point tomorrow. She had momentarily forgot that she wasn't alone here, that she stopped midway through her teleportation and looked back at the priest who was smiling to himself. So you truly are a Gremory, Naruto said, releasing a slight chuckle. Sirzex had been the only one of the Satans that he held any respect for. Seraphal had been too much a bubbly little girl who didn't seem to take her job seriously. He understood Ajuka but couldn't come to like the man since he created a way to enslave people, and Falibum he had no opinion of, having never truly conversed with the man. Rias tensed since he seemed to recognize her family name. He was a priest, so surely he had run into devils before, probably fighting them. Naruto smiled at her. It's alright, Rias-san. I mean you and your family no harm. Your family is one of the few that I respect. I am sure we'll meet again sometime in the future. With his piece said, he rose from the ground and walked away towards his home and out of sight. Rias stood still for the next couple of minutes thinking on just who this mysterious man was, and how he knew her family. Unwilling to contact her brother to ask if he knew this man, she teleported to Issei's house and dropped him off, and then she went home herself, all the while thinking about that man. Thanks for watching.